Discover the incredible journey of this grandma. A touching tale of unexpected triumph at 82. Evelyn Parker stood at the threshold of her attic, a cavern of dusty memories hidden beneath 12 layers of neglect. The worn wooden ladder sighed under her weight as she climbed up, a wave of nostalgia cascading over her. She had always been the caretaker, never the seeker of dreams. What am I even doing up here? She whispered to herself, uncertain if it was the dust or her heart that made her cough. She missed Robert, his warmth, his laughter that had filled their small home with life. Now, with the world moved on, she felt like an echo, fading in a community that had stopped seeing her long ago. She rummaged through old boxes. A small leather-bound journal caught her eye. It was her mother's, its spine cracked but still holding secrets she hadn't known existed. As she flipped through the yellowed pages, her pulse quickened. Her mother's handwriting danced across the page, recounting pioneering ideas in healthcare, inventive thoughts that had shaped lives. Evelyn remembered those late nights spent at her mother's side, the sparks of fascination igniting her own dreams of becoming a scientist. But those dreams had been snuffed out under the weight of motherhood, sacrificed on the altar of family. Could I really do this? She thought, clutching the journal to her chest. Her heart pounded as if it masked the terror mixed with exhilaration. Enrolling at the community college, a bastion of youthful vigor, seemed absurd at 82. The naysayers had voices sharper than blades, ready to cut down anyone daring to step outside societal norms. You're too old. The thought echoed, forcing a painful smile from her lips as she imagined the young students barely noticing her as she walked through the hallways. But once that inkling of hope had been stoked, it became a fire she couldn't ignore. She enrolled, feeling doubly like a relic and a revolutionary. She faced students, some barely old enough to drive, shooting her glances of confusion. She felt the ripple of their whispers. What does she know? How could she convince anyone that her wisdom, forged in decades of love and loss, was as valuable as the textbook theories they championed? Her own self-doubt crept closer, suffocating her resolve like heavy fog. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Evelyn's thoughts raced, leaving her dizzy. She fought through skepticism, focused on her research project, probing healthcare inequalities in her own community, her lived experience a goldmine in a world of academic jargon. Then a betrayal, data she gathered deemed invalid, a committee label of incompetence slamming into her hopes like a tidal wave. Outrage swelled within her chest, mingling with disbelief. She had poured her soul into this, but they only saw her age, not her heart. Anguish felt like a physical presence, tightening around her throat. She had trained tirelessly, drew upon her mother's innovations, yet here she hovered on the edge of failure. Would anyone ever understand that wisdom bore a different hue as the years passed? The skepticism from her peers echoed around her, a crib for her doubts, stifling every ounce of bravery she had. In that moment, standing on that precarious precipice, Evelyn knew she couldn't step back now. There was a bigger battle to fight. She felt the stir of resilience bubbling beneath her skin. But as she prepared to deliver her narrative, poised on the edge of breakthrough, she caught the gazes of judgment from classmates, tightening the knot in her stomach. Would they ever recognize her value? Would she redefine this moment's weight? Tension held her in a death grip. Would they see her as an elder, or simply cast her as another statistic of age? Evelyn set her jaw, steeling herself for the uphill battle ahead. The days following the committee's rejection were suffocating, her heart heavy with doubt, yet her mind spun with determination. She refused to be extinguished by their narrow-mindedness. The journal rested on her desk, a silent testament to her mother's spirit that echoed through her own aspirations. Whispers of the past urged her to reclaim not only her research but also her identity. As she navigated the labyrinth of the college corridors, Evelyn felt the weight of judgment. Students scattered before her, their youthful energy an unsettling reminder of the years she'd let slip away. But she couldn't surrender to the anxiety coursing through her veins. Instead, she focused on her work, poring over newly relevant studies, hunting for fresh angles and overlooked insights. The passion that had lain dormant within her since childhood surged forth, igniting her mind like wildfire. In the library, she encountered Professor Thompson, a seasoned academic with a reputation for challenging convention. When he noticed her struggling over data, he leaned over the table. "Evelyn, I see it? You're clearly invested in this. Why not present your findings to the class?" Her heart raced. "But they don't take me seriously. They see a grandma, not a researcher." He smiled, his eyes kind but piercing. "If you believe in your work, they will eventually see the truth." Led with that conviction, Evelyn left the encounter charged yet trembling. What did she really believe? For years she had distilled her worth to mere statistics. Age, career sacrifices, societal expectations. Could her longings blend with her abilities to create something potent enough to dismantle their perceptions? The following week, amidst the cacophony of young voices, she stood at the front of the class, her voice trembling slightly as she launched into her presentation. With every spoken word, she recounted her journey, a tapestry woven with threads of experience, passion, and loss. She illustrated the disparities in healthcare access, grounding data with personal anecdotes that resonated with her peers. The room, initially filled with skepticism, shifted. Faces once marred by doubt now leaned forward, drawn into the narrative she told. Evelyn felt the pulse of engagement in the room, the spark that ignited when knowledge met storytelling. Then came her damning moment. "Today, we underestimate the contributions of seniors in research because we cannot see beyond their years. The reality is wisdom can't be packaged into a neat statistic." The words hung in the air, resonating like a challenge. Rumbles of applause broke the silence that followed. It was insignificant compared to the weight narrowing around her heart, but it was a crack. She saw sparks of curiosity in her classmates' eyes, an openness to the value she suddenly represented. Evelyn walked away from the podium lighter than she had felt in years, but the lingering shadow of the committee's judgment loomed large. In that applause she glimpsed the possibility of validation, yet questions relentlessly surged within her. Would this moment be enough to silence her critics? Would she transform skepticism into respect, or was she merely playing the babbling fool in a land of youth? The night wore on, tangled with mixed emotions. She was buoyed by her triumph yet hollow with uncertainty. There was a decision looming before her, one that would determine her journey moving forward. Would she confront the committee head-on, armed with her research once more? Or would she divert, seeking validation in another avenue? One way led to empowerment, the other risked her spirit. Tension hung thick in the air, simmering with the weight of her choices. The moment of truth awaited. Morning light filtered through the window, dappling Evelyn's workspace with warmth. Yet, instead of comfort, the light felt like scrutiny illuminating her indecision. She stared at the stack of research papers before her, reminders of her resolve battling against the gnawing apprehension of failure. Recalling the committee's dismissive looks, she questioned her own motivations once again. Did she really want to prove them wrong? Or was there a deeper need for acknowledgement that urged her on? With the glow of the sun fueling her intention, Evelyn made a choice. She would revisit her proposal and refine it, steering it into a sharp blade that could cut through ignorance. Each revised line became an affirmation of her worth. The initial draft had echoed her fears, laden with the weight of apology. Now, armed with the fervor from her presentation, she resolved to counter every anticipated critique with data-driven arguments, crafting her narrative into a compelling necessity, rather than a desperate plea. Days melted into nights as she revised relentlessly, synthesizing statistics and elucidating their relevance. The committee had to see her not just as a senior in years but as a pioneer with valid, groundbreaking research. She dissected her own findings, confirming how the narratives of marginalized populations must stay at the forefront of any progressive healthcare reform. But as she typed furiously, a shadow of doubt crept back in. A poignant memory resurfaced when her daughter had hesitated to point out that her mother's wisdom was often ignored in discussions about the future of healthcare. Had Evelyn sidelined her own voice for so long that she had diluted her contributions into mere footnotes of conversations? Fighting against the creeping self-doubt, she reminded herself of her motivation. This was more than just an academic pursuit. It was a quest for justice in a realm that routinely silenced the voices of its elder contributors. The night before her scheduled meeting with the committee, Evelyn lay awake, sifting through her articles, considering every critique she might face. She envisioned the room, the committee members' faces contorted in skepticism. Heart pounding, she contemplated her own attributes: deep knowledge, resilience, and tenacity. Each quality had molded her into who she was today, not just as a woman of age but as a formidable mind ready to contribute to critical dialogues. At dawn, she stood before her reflection, a ritual that had progressively anchored her in purpose. "You are here to challenge," she whispered. The echo of her voice fortified her resolve. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her materials, each piece representing her growth and determination. The act of assembling them felt sacred, almost like alchemy. What once seemed discouraging transformed into a robust testament of her capabilities. As she made her way to the meeting, the corridors of the college held a different energy. They pulsated with promise rather than judgment. She remembered Professor Thompson's words, remembering that conviction beckoned visibility. She could be a beacon for others, proving that age was not a barrier to insight or innovation. Entering the conference room, Evelyn felt the air thicken with tension. The committee members' gazes pinned her, but instead of retreating into herself, she stood tall, every fiber of her being urging remaining steady and fierce. The moment had come to confront her detractors with her vision, armed with patience and the power of her experiences. This was not just about her work. It was a declaration that wisdom, however cloaked, earned its place at the table. As she prepared to deliver her opening statement, the atmosphere shifted, charged with possibility. Determined to rise above skepticism, she launched into her presentation, igniting the pivotal moment that would either forge her victory or confirm her worst fears. But was she truly prepared for the revelations and conflicts that might arise in these next critical moments? Would the committee recognize the strength of her perspective, or would they dig in deeper, veiling her hard-fought truth in their youthful prejudices? This confrontation loomed closer, ready to unleash the truth of her journey and test the limits of her resolve. The opening lines of her presentation echoed in her ears, a melody infused with fervor and apprehension. As Evelyn laid out her research, she could sense the committee's attention shift, if only for a moment, from skepticism to intrigue. Her words weren't just data points. They were the lifeblood of experiences she had endured and witnessed, a tapestry of human struggles woven into the fabric of her personal and professional life. Every statistic she presented seemed poised to paint a clear picture, but she couldn't rid herself of the piercing stares from some members, their expressions a blend of skepticism and dismissal. She pressed forward, infusing energy into her voice, determined to break through the invisible barriers that tried to overshadow her endeavors. This was her moment to not only share findings, but to assert her rightful position in the discourse. These findings don't merely reflect statistics. They reflect lives that demand to be acknowledged and validated, she asserted, her passion igniting in front of her. For every nod of understanding, there seemed to be lingering doubts reflected in furrowed brows and pursed lips around the table. The rumbles of hesitation felt like heavy stones, but Evelyn circled around the criticism that emerged, drawing upon her applicable knowledge and her hard-earned wisdom. But a cornered feeling began to swell within her as one committee member, Dr. Lang, raised a hand, a gesture that brought immediate silence. "Your passion is commendable, Evelyn," he began, each word deliberately weighed. "However, can you provide a more empirical basis for including these narratives in the clinical frameworks?" The question hung in the air, sharp and taut like a drawn bowstring. Evelyn felt the pronounced shift in the room, and doubt flooded her senses. Was her push for inclusion merely sentimental? She paused, mentally navigating the fraught intersection of academia and lived experience. Her heart raced, but within that pulse lay the stirring resolve that had propelled her forward. Evelyn concentrated on her thoughts. Realizing this was at the moment where all her introspection and preparation would pay off. "Narratives are not simply emotional appeals," she began, deliberately steadying every syllable. "They provide context, enhancing the validity of quantitative data by adding the rich, qualitative tapestry of human experience. Ignoring them strips our interpretations of crucial dimensions of truth." At the sound of her own resolute voice, Evelyn felt her confidence surge. The words poured out, each statement a command backed by the years of insight she had gained throughout her life. For the first time since entering the room, she felt that the tides had begun to turn. Several heads nodded along with the cadence of her speech, and she could see a glimmer of acknowledgement on some members' faces. Yet, as the tide shifted, they did not recede entirely. Dr. Lang's skepticism remained. Theoretical implications are one thing, but we need a framework, he countered, still entrenched in his critique. Evelyn structured her answer with care, aware that the next moments could define her not just as a scholar, but as a pioneer. By integrating narrative-based healthcare, we bridge a critical gap, not merely creating a framework, but cultivating and understanding one that turns empathy into actionable insight. In that instant, the echoes from her daughter's earlier words rang louder and clearer. Was this not just a plea for recognition but an ultimatum to honor herself and the struggles of those who felt similar pressures? This was her coming-of-age moment, not solely in her career but in her identity as a thinker, a healer, a mother. The atmosphere grew electric as other committee members began to engage, trading ideas while challenges persisted. Each perspective clashed and melded, evolving the discourse into a broader examination of healthcare. Evelyn felt the exhilarating sting of connection, awareness cascading through her while they navigated complex issues together. As the meeting progressed, she sensed a shift. What once felt like an uphill battle transformed into a dialogue, an exchange of ideas crystallizing into a hopeful future. Yet lurking beneath this blossoming recognition was the gnawing uncertainty of her ultimate acceptance. Were the ripples of acknowledgement strong enough to gain her the final breakthrough she desperately needed? With the conclusion of her presentation nearing, she both relished and dreaded the moment she would leave the room. Would the committee see her for who she was becoming, or return to their previous doubts, dismissing her contributions once more? Time hung like a pendulum, each tick amplifying her mixed anticipation. Evelyn made one last effort to engage with them as noted scholars, yet inside her chest echoed a daunting question. Could her voice truly resonate, or was she merely a fading whisper in the halls of modern academia? With the moment of truth drawing near, each heartbeat lifted the stakes higher. The next words she would hear would seal her fate against the unyielding currents of her own determination. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as the last lingering murmur of conversation faded into silence, and eyes turned toward her once more. The tension was tangible, the anticipation charged with unspoken expectations. The committee would either validate her journey or render it moot, and the thought unsettled her deeply. Yet, she felt something shift within her at that moment, a determination to make the stakes personal. Amidst the critical gaze of Dr. Lang, she recalled the countless evenings spent crafting her research, the tears shed over discarded drafts, and the enduring faith her family had placed in her vision. It became clear. This was more than a presentation. It was her legacy, a testament to her resilience and purpose. Evelyn breathed in, feeling the weight of history on her shoulders. What we explore today has ramifications not only for the academic community, but for the families whose lives are affected by our work. My research doesn't just matter to me. It is the culmination of every individual who has become a part of this narrative, who has entrusted their story to a system that often overlooks their truth. Her voice, steady and clear, resonated with raw honesty, transforming the sterile atmosphere into one teeming with emotional resonance. Yet, the counterweight of doubt still hovered. Dr. Lang's brow remained furrowed, his lips tight. But how do we ensure that this narrative approach is rigorous? Anecdotes, however compelling, can lead to subjective interpretations. Certainly, she replied, a fire igniting within her. But the integration of narrative into our research creates a bridge between the statistics and the lived experiences of individuals. Each story offers dimensions of understanding that numbers alone cannot capture. Don't we owe it to those we aim to serve to honor their experiences in a meaningful way? In that instant, she recognized her answer soared beyond mere justification. It came from her unwavering commitment to challenge entrenched academic norms. The committee listened more intently now, and for the first time she noticed the shift in their body language. The skepticism that had once seemed so impenetrable began to crack, revealing a glimmer of potential agreement. Evelyn pressed on. Imagine a clinical framework that is not only data-driven, but also human-centered, where healthcare professionals are equipped to relate to patients beyond symptoms, recognizing them as people with narratives woven from hopes, dreams, and struggles. This is not about diluting empirical research, it's about enriching it. Small nods and exchanged glances began to circulate the committee, and in that electrifying moment, Evelyn felt herself unlocking the barriers she had so anxiously confronted. Even Dr. Lang's demeanor softened a fraction, the sharp edges of his skepticism starting to blur. However, a gnawing doubt still tangled in her mind. Had she articulated enough? Would they see her value as a bridge builder in this traditionally rigid field? The stakes continued to rise with every heartbeat, and Evelyn's resolve was tempered by a twist of anxiety as she awaited their response. Finally, the chairwoman, Dr. Hayes, broke the silence with an almost imperceptible smile. Evelyn, you've presented a compelling case for the integration of lived experiences into our frameworks. It suggests a paradigm shift that could redefine how we approach healthcare. But how do we begin implementing this strategy? Her pulse quickened again. The discussion was shifting from skepticism toward collaboration, but would it translate into the acceptance she coveted? Evelyn squared her shoulders. I propose forming a pilot program. By selecting a few case studies to track, we can document the impacts of narrative integration, allowing us to assess effectiveness rigorously, while still embracing the qualitative insights. The committee engaged, exchanging ideas and voicing concerns that melded into a vibrant conversation, alive with possibility. For the first time they were brainstorming, not merely critiquing. Yet, as she watched her vision unfold, a frightening realization dawned on her. Could she sustain this energy beyond today? What would happen when the novelty wore off and the realities of implementing her ideas came crashing through like a monsoon? Evelyn knew she was at a pivotal crossroad, dangling between the thrill of possibility and the trepidation of implementation. The session was winding down, but the questions she faced were more pressing than ever. As the final exchanges wrapped up, Evelyn caught Dr. Lang's eye. The skepticism had faded, but was he truly convinced, or merely assenting to a shift in the narrative? The bare tension she felt deep in her gut bore down hard. The impending challenge loomed larger than life. One thought crystallized in her mind: what would her next steps be in a world where she had to integrate her aspirations with a reality that demanded endurance and perpetual reflection? With the committee's final verdict still pending, she stepped back, determined to navigate this new path she had uncovered for herself. But she knew the road ahead would require more than just passion. The moment had come to truly embrace her role, no matter the trials that lay ahead. The days that followed the committee meeting felt like a blur. Every moment carried the undercurrent of uncertainty where anticipation and dread intertwined. Evelyn found herself pacing the floor of her small office, mentally drafting the emails she had yet to send, and reworking her research proposals in her mind. Each imagined interaction heightened her sense of urgency. She had stirred the pot, but now the pressure was on to keep it boiling. She spent the first day after the meeting overwhelmed by a parade of new ideas. Collaborations, potential case studies, even a workshop for healthcare professionals filled her thoughts. Yet, with each gleaming prospect came whispers of insecurity. Could she manage a project of this scale? Was her vision robust enough to withstand the practical challenges of implementation? The internal chatter threatened to derail her excitement, but with determination, she channeled her anxiety into action. That afternoon, she faced the first test of her resolve. A discussion thread among committee members emerged in her inbox, and she hesitated before opening it. This was the moment to engage, to influence, to assert herself in conversations that could shape her proposal into reality. Evidently, several of her peers had similar questions about the integration of narratives into research, and the conversation quickly morphed into a collaborative forum filled with suggestions and constructive critiques. With her palms clammy and stomach churning, she typed vigorously. Drawing from her earlier talk, Evelyn emphasized the significance of qualitative insights. When we hear the stories behind the data, we truly begin to comprehend the real implications of our work. As she pressed send, she could feel her heart pounding, a mix of exhilaration and fear fluttering within her. The reply that came moments later caught her off guard. Energy surged through the thread. Ideas were generating, and her earlier contributions sparked curiosity. They wanted to know how to present her ideas formally and gauge interest. This was it. This was her opportunity to take charge. She followed up with a detailed outline for the pilot program proposal, incorporating feedback from the conversation around her points on narrative importance. The more she wrote, the more her confidence grew. Yet, she still questioned whether she could sustain this momentum. Every step she took seemed both exhilarating and perilous. Each evening turned into brainstorming sessions where she grappled with how to integrate external insights with her foundational vision. Could she really tie the qualitative narratives back into rigorous scientific evaluation? The thought haunted her: would the numbers reflect what she was trying to achieve? As the weekend approached, she felt the excitement building again but was reluctantly aware of age-old patterns coursing through her thoughts. What if she fell short? What if her ideas, once vibrant, withered under the strain of institutional pressure? The familiar weight of self-doubt clung to her, forcing her to confront the possibility that those doubts might still be her strongest adversaries. She wrestled with her need for feedback, a necessity that felt fraught with vulnerability. Each time she'd brush her fingertips across the keys to ask for critiques, she'd wonder if she was once again inviting the scrutiny of a world that had previously dismissed her. But another part of her recognized the importance of collaboration and support in her journey. She began drafting an invitation for a small brainstorming session with those who had shown interest. It was a careful balance between being bold and bracing for criticism. Slowly, she typed out her thoughts, acknowledging her fears while emphasizing the collective nature of this endeavor. As we embark on this engagement, let us harness the strengths of our differing perspectives. Together, we can build a narrative framework that carries the weight of empirical rigor, while honoring the lived experiences behind the data. Much like healthcare, this must be a holistic endeavor. As she pressed send, she realized that letting others into her vision hadn't diluted her authority. It strengthened it. Yet even as the responses began pouring in, igniting a fire within her, a gnawing reminder lingered. Maintaining this energy would require consistent effort: discussions, revisions, overcoming obstacles, and wrestling with her own fears. Loss, triumph, and vulnerability painted a path forward, but at what cost? Would she be strong enough to handle the challenges lurking ahead, waiting for their moment to strike? This thought hung heavily in the air. While her initial excitement blossomed into determination, a deeper truth became apparent: approaching the task with both vulnerability and strength would redefine not just her work but her very identity in the academia she had sought to challenge. As she ventured toward this new territory, a quiet voice, the still lingering fear, emerged, insinuating that the most significant test awaited. With a mix of hope and apprehension pulsing within her, Evelyn steeled herself for the inevitable confrontation of her deepest uncertainties. What harsh realities would challenge her resolve? The journey had only just begun, and she knew she had to face the moment of truth soon. Evelyn awoke the following Monday with an air of determination, the weekend's doubts quelled by the energetic responses to her meeting invitation. As she prepared for the brainstorming session that afternoon, she felt a shift within herself, a burgeoning recognition of her capabilities. This was not just about her ideas. It was an opportunity to foster collaboration and construct something meaningful. The clock ticked with an impatient rhythm. She dressed deliberately, channeling her intent into each choice. The crisp blazer would signal professionalism, while her favorite scarf added a touch of warmth. She took a moment to breathe deeply, reminding herself of her purpose. Today was about empowerment, not just for her but for her colleagues who would contribute their insights. As members began to connect to the video call, their faces filled the screen with a mix of anticipation and curiosity. Evelyn quickly sensed the collective energy. She opened the session with a brief overview of her proposal, laying out both her vision and the critical integration of narrative insights within the data. Nervous energy surged through her fingers, but she pressed on, her voice steady. Storytelling and research isn't just an embellishment. It's a tool for understanding, she asserted, looking into the faces of her peers. We need to appreciate the context of our numbers to truly address the needs of the community. Responses came in rapid succession: questions, ideas, counterpoints. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Each contribution expanded the discussion, leading her down paths she hadn't envisioned. The dialogue flowed, ideas blossomed, and Evelyn found herself navigating the currents skillfully. Encouraging others to speak up sated her earlier fears, revealing a hidden strength within her. However, as insights poured forth, so did the friction. Disagreements emerged regarding the focus of the proposal. Some felt it strayed too far into emotional territory, potentially compromising academic rigor. Evelyn felt a familiar tightness in her chest as harsh critiques echoed in her mind, the very thoughts she had fought against only days prior. In that moment, a pivotal choice materialized before her. Would she adhere strictly to her vision, risking disconnection from her colleagues, or would she open herself to refinements, even at the cost of her original concept? She paused, allowing the weight of the implications to swirl around her before responding with composure. I appreciate the pushback. It's essential for our growth. But isn't our ultimate goal to humanize the data? If we disregard the lived experiences, what insights can we truly gain? The conviction in her voice surprised her, the grounding of her purpose eclipsing her insecurities. The conversation shifted, metamorphosing into a constructive debate rather than a battleground of ideas. Colleagues began to rally around her emphasis on narrative as an integral element of research, not merely a supplementary feature. Evelyn's willingness to embrace uncertainty showcased her growth. The timid academic who once overthought responses now stood firm in her vision. As the session neared its end, she felt a surge of clarity, a newfound understanding of collaboration. Each voice enriched her proposal, and she recognized her leadership was not about controlling the direction, but empowering her peers to share their truths. They were shaping the narrative together, a process that nurtured bonds and trust. Yet as she drafted the meeting summary later that evening, a gnawing unease crept back in. Would the academic community embrace this shift? A subtle voice warned her that acceptance was not guaranteed. Doubt lingered. What if she couldn't translate this success into support from higher-ups? The looming fear of institutional resistance wrapped around her mind like a vice. Evelyn's heart raced as she weighed her next steps. Embracing the chaos was critical, but so was presenting her findings persuasively to those who held decision-making power over her aspirations. How could she armor herself against the criticisms yet to come? As she closed her laptop, she took one final deep breath. This was the moment of truth, a fork in the road where she could either succumb to fear or rise to the challenge of positioning her vision within a larger framework. Tomorrow would come with its own tests, and the stakes only seemed to rise. In the echo of her past doubts, Evelyn pondered one closing thought. This was the beginning of a far deeper battle, one fighting for her ideas to be seen and embraced not just as valid but revolutionary. Would she find the courage to confront her future? Or would her insecurities pull her back yet again? Evelyn awoke the next day, a fresh wave of resolve washing over her. The night had given her the space to reflect deeply on her meeting, and she could still feel the remnants of that lively debate resonating within her. Stepping into the shower, she let the water cascade over her, envisioning the key points she would need to articulate to her superiors during the upcoming presentation. This was more than just an idea. It was her vision, and she knew it deserved a powerful defense. The morning was still cool as she settled in at her desk, laptop open and notes strewn before her. She began outlining her presentation, focusing on how to frame her narrative approach as a revolutionary method to both complement and elevate their research efforts. She could hear the echoes of her colleagues' supports and critiques, each contributing to the refining of her ideas. This was not merely a compilation of data anymore but a clarified mission, to humanize the numbers, to make them palpable. Evelyn's contemplation was interrupted by a notification pinging on her screen, an email from her supervisor. Looking forward to seeing your findings later this week, it stated tersely. The thrill of possibility intertwined with the anxiety of scrutiny twisted in her gut. Could she balance the emotional depth of her narrative with the statistical rigor her department demanded? The stakes felt monumental. After a quick breakfast, she dove back into her work. Each data point, every narrative insight she wove, contributed to a larger tapestry of understanding. Her research transformed from a solitary endeavor into an evolving narrative where data and stories could coexist. As the hours slipped by, Evelyn began to feel the thrill of creation, her fingers flying across the keyboard as though in a dance of ideas. However, moments of self-doubt crept back in, conspiring to force her back into old patterns of procrastination. The voice of the cautious academic within her questioned whether her ideas would be dismissed as sentimental. Was she jeopardizing her credibility? She folded her arms and stared blankly at the screen, wrestling with the thought. Suddenly a realization hit her. Perhaps the critics had a point. Perhaps the blending of emotion and logic required a delicate balance. But was it not worth the risk? With a renewed sense of purpose, she reached for her phone and called her mentor, a seasoned professional known for her straightforward advice. Evelyn, you have to understand this isn't about choosing between emotion and rigor, came the voice on the other end. It's about illustrating what the data means. Show them the human side of the research. It was a revelation that struck a chord, resonating within her as she nodded along to the conversation, even though her mentor couldn't see her. After the call, Evelyn scribbled down an additional section for her presentation, determined to articulate not just what the data revealed but why it mattered. Her mentor's words sparked a fresh awareness that her argument was not simply an appeal, but a strategic incorporation of compelling storytelling within empirical research. The afternoon sun filtered through her window as she rehearsed her points out loud, each articulation enhancing her confidence. Yet, just as she began to believe wholeheartedly in her capability to merge these two worlds, a flicker of dread returned. What if the higher-ups remained entrenched in their traditional views? The thought was paralyzing, but she pushed through it, forcing herself to write down her fears, dissecting them in an effort to find clarity. Evelyn paused and reflected on her journey thus far. She had fought through a storm of doubt and emerged stronger, embracing her identity not just as a researcher but as a storyteller. Now, she would have to bring that strength into the boardroom. As she prepared for the final refinement of her presentation that evening, a sudden realization loomed in the back of her mind. What if she wasn't just presenting her findings to win approval? What if, instead, this was an opportunity to ignite a spark of change within her field? This thought ignited a resolve so fierce it overshadowed her fears. Yet, with the excitement surged a daunting realization: the layers of resistance she would need to unravel would require more than just a compelling presentation. It would call for deep engagement, persuasive strategies, and most importantly, an unwavering belief in her ideas. As she prepared to face the challenges ahead, a question lodged itself in her mind. Would she be able to sustain this momentum long enough to change the course of her career? Tomorrow loomed not just as another day, but as the beginning of a confrontation, a chance to rise against the odds and redefine the narrative of her work. Evelyn spent the evening perfecting her presentation, but with each refinement, a wave of anxiety washed over her. The stakes felt impossibly high, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on a precipice. As she adjusted her slides for the umpteenth time, the neon colors of her charts began to blur, her mind racing ahead to the possible reactions of her audience. What if her approach was met with disapproval, skepticism, or worse, indifference? In the stillness of her apartment, filled with the glow of her laptop, Evelyn decided to take a break. She stepped out onto her balcony to breathe in the night air, hoping to ground herself. As she gazed at the city lights flickering against a velvet sky, fragmented thoughts started to form a coherent picture. This wasn't just about her. Every statistic she interpreted, every narrative she crafted, held the potential to influence change, to advocate for a more human-centered perspective in her field. The next morning arrived too quickly, a blend of anticipation and dread bubbling in her stomach. Sitting at her desk, she went over her notes for the last time. Each bullet point represented a battle won, but the looming presentation still felt like the ultimate test. She had built a framework around her data that was as emotive as it was empirical, yet doubt wormed its way back into her consciousness. Would her passion resonate with the decision-makers, or would they dismiss her as naive? Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her reverie. A message from her mentor flashed on the screen. Remember, courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The words stirred something inside her. She realized that her impending presentation offered more than proof of her work. It was an assertion of her identity. She was no longer just a researcher confined to the walls of academia. She was an advocate for change, a voice that mattered. As she made her way to the meeting room, each step felt heavier than the last. The polished floors reflected the fluorescent lights above, and she couldn't help but notice the bustling activity around her. Colleagues hurried past, engrossed in their own preparations, unaware of the internal battle she was fighting. What did it matter what they thought? As the panel of senior researchers and executives took their seats, a hush fell over the room. Her heart thudded in her chest as she positioned herself behind the lectern. The initial slides were mechanical. She hit her points with precision despite her racing thoughts. Then, as she approached the crux of her presentation, a moment of clarity pierced through her fog of anxiety. Evelyn pivoted from the data-driven narrative to recount a poignant story connected to her research, an account that illustrated the real-life implications of her findings. She spoke with conviction, drawing her listeners into the emotional depths of the data, demonstrating its impact on individuals whose lives were often rendered invisible by the statistics. Her voice grew steadier with every word, bolstered by a growing sense of purpose. Yet, just as she began to captivate her audience, she noticed a few of them exchanging skeptical glances. The familiar itch of self-doubt crept back in. Doubt clawed at her as she braced for questions. Were they merely echoing her internal fears? The very essence of her argument felt under siege, but she pressed on, engulfed in her narrative, passionately defending her approach. As the final slide shimmered on the screen, she finished strong, a rush of exhilaration flooding through her. The tension in the room shifted, but before she could bask in it, questions flew. Some challenged her stance directly, pushing her to dig deeper into the validity of her choices. The confrontation was intense, but instead of retreating into defensiveness, Evelyn engaged them, feeling her own confidence buoyed by the challenge. When the storm of skepticism finally settled, a quiet hung in the air before applauses erupted. As she stepped down from the lectern, Evelyn felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: empowerment. But within her triumph lingered uncertainty. The battle to redefine her field had just begun, and deeper conflicts awaited. Could she sustain this momentum to influence not just her peers, but the entire system? Or would she find herself swallowed up again by the very fears she had begun to conquer? Tomorrow held the promise of unraveling the shrouded dynamics of her profession, a chance for further confrontation that could redefine everything she believed about her place in the field. Evelyn sat at her desk, the echoes of applause still resonating in her mind. That afternoon had been nothing short of revolutionary. She had faced skepticism head-on and emerged not just unscathed but invigorated. This was her evolving identity taking shape, no longer merely a grandma with memories to share, but a formidable researcher daring to reform the landscape of healthcare discourse. In the days following her presentation, the fervor in Evelyn's mind blossomed into tangible opportunities. The committee responded enthusiastically, the dialogue around her paper expanding beyond her initial expectations. They scheduled a follow-up meeting, keen to delve deeper into her proposal. Evelyn's heart raced with anticipation. The naysayers had transformed into allies, and she was on the verge of changing the academic approach to healthcare narratives. As she prepared for the upcoming meeting, she faced herself in the reflection of her window. The woman staring back was not the frail, hesitant elder who had cowered before doubt. This was Evelyn Parker, a pioneer in integrating lived experiences with quantitative data, a bridge builder forging connections between theory and humanity. Evelyn pored over her notes, her heart resonating with conviction as she reshaped the presentation. Objective quantitative data danced with qualitative insights, forming a cohesive narrative that promised to enrich future studies and clinical practices alike. She envisioned healthcare professionals engaging with their patients as real individuals, their stories offering as much truth as the numbers depicted. This was not mere wishful thinking, it was the next frontier in healthcare reform. When the meeting day arrived, Evelyn entered the conference room with a buoyant heartbeat and steady resolve. The faces of committee members were charged with anticipation, curious about her new insights. As she spoke, weaving intricate narratives from her research findings, the room transformed into a vibrant exchange of ideas. Questions flowed, discussions sparked, and for every challenge she faced, Evelyn responded with agile confidence. Her years of experience now sharpened into a powerful tool. By the end of the meeting, she sensed that the tide had shifted completely. They were not just accepting her ideas, they were enthusiastic about championing them. Dr. Hayes leaned forward, her eyes gleaming, and congratulated Evelyn. Your insights could lead to the initiation of what we'll call the Narrative Impact Program. We need this perspective to ensure patients are truly heard. Evelyn's smile broke across her face, a surge of pride rising within her. She hadn't merely defended her position. She had invited others to share her vision, managing to unite disparate voices under a common cause. It felt like a rebirth, not only in her career but in her purpose. With the new program approved, Evelyn understood that her journey was evolving from mere research to active advocacy, promoting policies that integrated both statistics and human experiences. Suddenly, the once uncertain landscape of academia transformed into a vibrant field of opportunity. Weeks later, as she stood in front of her peers at a conference, her own session now held in a large hall filled with eager attendees, Evelyn saw the yield of her commitment. She confidently presented the outcomes of the Narrative Impact Program, showcasing testimonials, data-driven improvements, and lives changed through this newfound focus on narrative in healthcare. The applause that followed was deafening, presenting her a solid affirmation of her long-fought battle against the limitations of age and convention. Evelyn smiled, her heart bursting with achievements that extended beyond credentials. She had proven that age does not negate the capacity for contribution and innovation. She had conquered her self-doubt and reclaimed her voice in a world that had previously muted it. The long-neglected attic of her dreams was now a vibrant garden of possibilities, yielding fruits that fueled her passion. The audience was not merely spectators, they were co-creators in this movement she had galvanized. Looking out at the sea of faces eager to engage, learn and act, Evelyn understood the importance of sharing her story. In each twilight of uncertainty, she had proven that true transformation was possible, and the confidence she felt was both well-earned and sustainable and no longer an echo of the past. She stood on a solid foundation recognized and respected. The accolades she achieved were not merely recognition of her work, they were affirmations of her evolution. This was her moment. A celebration of tenacity, resilience, and indomitable spirit. As she stepped away from the lectern, Evelyn knew one truth. She had not just transformed her life. She had created a legacy, ensuring that newer generations would hear their stories woven into the fabric of research moving forward. Now, it's your turn to embrace transformation. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment below your reactions and theories about Evelyn's journey. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second.